Polar vortex collapse. Just got confirmed. February will be catastrophic. A catastrophic polar vortex collapse has just been officially confirmed by meteorologists, and what's about to unfold across America will redefine everything we thought we knew about February weather patterns. This isn't just another winter storm threat. This represents a complete atmospheric breakdown that will unleash weeks of unprecedented weather chaos from coast to coast, affecting over 200 million Americans in ways they've never experienced before. The polar vortex, that massive circulation of Arctic air that normally stays locked over the North Pole, is disintegrating in real time. When this happens, it's like opening the floodgates to the most brutal cold air on Earth, sending it racing southward across North America with devastating consequences that extend far beyond just frigid temperatures. What makes this collapse particularly alarming is the timing and intensity. February polar vortex events are historically rare, but when they occur, they create some of the most extreme weather disasters in recorded history. The last comparable event reshaped winter weather patterns for months, triggering everything from record-breaking cold snaps to massive ice storms that left millions without power for weeks. Current atmospheric data shows the polar vortex beginning to elongate and weaken dramatically over the next 48 to 72 hours. This stretching motion creates what meteorologists call a stratospheric warming event. Essentially, the polar vortex starts to wobble like a spinning top, losing momentum before it completely falls apart. The initial signs of this collapse are already becoming visible in weather patterns across the northern hemisphere. Temperature anomalies of 40 to 50 degrees below normal are building across northern Canada and Alaska, representing the kind of extreme cold that hasn't moved this far south in over a decade. But here's what makes this situation particularly dangerous. The collapse isn't happening in isolation. It's occurring simultaneously with other atmospheric phenomena that will amplify its effects exponentially. A massive ridge of high pressure is building across the North Pacific, essentially creating a roadblock that will force all this Arctic air to take the only available path, straight down through the heart of North America. The timeline for this atmospheric catastrophe unfolds with frightening precision. Phase 1 begins this weekend, as the first fragments of collapsed polar vortex energy start pushing into the northern United States. This initial wave will drop temperatures by 30 to 40 degrees in some areas within 24 hours, creating the kind of shock that power grids and infrastructure simply aren't designed to handle. Phase 2 arrives around February 15th, and this is where conditions become truly devastating. The main body of the collapsed vortex will establish itself across the central United States, bringing sustained temperatures that could remain 40 to 60 degrees below normal for days or potentially weeks. We're talking about daytime highs of minus 20 degrees Fahrenheit in cities like Chicago, Minneapolis, and Des Moines. Atlanta could see temperatures drop below zero. Even areas as far south as central Texas and northern Florida could experience their coldest temperatures in over 30 years. But the cold is only part of the story. When polar vortex collapses occur, they create atmospheric instability that triggers multiple weather disasters simultaneously. The sharp temperature gradients between the Arctic air and normal seasonal temperatures create perfect conditions for explosive storm development. This setup has already begun generating what meteorologists are calling bombogenesis events, storms that intensify so rapidly they essentially explode into existence. These systems can produce everything from blizzard conditions with hurricane-force winds to ice storms that accumulate several inches of ice on power lines and trees. The energy balance in our atmosphere becomes completely disrupted when polar vortex collapses happen. Normal jet stream patterns break down entirely, creating what's known as meridional flow. Essentially, the jet stream stops flowing west to east and instead develops massive north-south loops that transport Arctic air thousands of miles farther south than it should ever travel. February 18th through 25th represents the peak danger period based on current atmospheric modeling. During this time frame, multiple storm systems will likely develop along the boundaries between the displaced Arctic air and normal February temperatures. Each of these storms has the potential to become a significant weather disaster in its own right. The Pacific Northwest could see unprecedented snow accumulations as moisture from atmospheric rivers collides with the Arctic air mass. Cities like Seattle and Portland, which rarely experience significant snow, could receive feet of accumulation that would completely shut down transportation and commerce for extended periods. The Great Lakes region faces a particularly dangerous scenario. When Arctic air this cold moves over the relatively warm waters of the lakes, it creates lake-effect snow conditions unlike anything residents have experienced. Snowbands could dump 3 to 5 feet of snow in narrow corridors, creating impassable conditions and stranding communities for days. The Ohio and Tennessee valleys will likely experience a devastating ice storm scenario as warm air overruns the Arctic surface air. This creates perfect conditions for freezing rain that could accumulate to catastrophic levels. We're potentially talking about ice accumulations that could exceed an inch in some areas, causing widespread power outages that could last for weeks. Even the Southeast faces unprecedented challenges from this polar vortex collapse. Cities like Atlanta, Birmingham, and Charlotte could experience their most significant winter weather event in decades, with the potential for heavy snow, ice, and temperatures cold enough to cause widespread infrastructure failures. The agricultural implications alone are staggering. February is a critical month for early spring preparations across the farming industry, and sustained temperatures this far below normal could devastate crops that have already begun emerging from winter dormancy. The economic impact could extend well into the growing season and affect food prices nationwide. Energy infrastructure faces perhaps the greatest immediate threat. When temperatures drop this dramatically and remain sustained for extended periods, energy demand skyrockets while production capacity often decreases due to equipment failures in extreme cold. The Texas power grid crisis of 2021 provides a sobering example of what can happen when infrastructure isn't prepared for Arctic conditions. Natural gas pipelines, electrical transmission lines, and even wind turbines begin failing when exposed to temperatures 40 to 60 degrees below normal for extended periods. These failures create cascading effects that can leave millions without heating, precisely when they need it most. The transportation sector will face complete disruption across vast areas of the country. Airlines will be forced to cancel thousands of flights as aircraft cannot safely operate in extreme cold conditions. Airports lack the de-icing capacity to handle the volume of flights during prolonged Arctic conditions. Highway transportation becomes equally challenging. Semi-trucks and other commercial vehicles experience mechanical failures at much higher rates in extreme cold, and the combination of ice storms and blizzard conditions will make many roadways impassable for days or weeks. Urban areas face unique challenges during polar vortex collapses. The urban heat island effect that normally moderates city temperatures becomes overwhelmed by Arctic air this intense. Cities could actually become colder than surrounding rural areas as concrete and steel infrastructure radiates away what little heat is available. Homeless populations face life-threatening conditions that emergency services may struggle to address adequately. Shelters designed for normal winter conditions become insufficient when temperatures drop to levels not seen in decades. Water infrastructure presents another major concern. Water mains begin bursting when sustained temperatures drop below levels they were designed to handle. Even indoor plumbing in poorly insulated buildings can freeze, creating widespread property damage and leaving communities without water service. The psychological impact of prolonged extreme cold cannot be underestimated. When temperatures remain life-threatening for weeks, it affects everything from work productivity to mental health across affected populations. Cabin fever becomes a real public health concern when people cannot safely venture outdoors for extended periods. Schools and businesses will face impossible decisions about whether to remain open when temperatures make it dangerous for people to travel to and from facilities. Extended closures create economic ripple effects that can persist long after temperatures moderate. February 20th appears to be emerging as a particularly critical date in forecast models. Multiple storm systems could be developing simultaneously across different regions, each one capable of producing its own weather disaster, while the broader polar vortex collapse continues, affecting continental weather patterns. The West Coast will not escape the effects of this polar vortex collapse, though impacts will manifest differently. Instead of extreme cold, atmospheric river events will likely become more frequent and intense as the disrupted jet stream creates pathways for Pacific moisture to repeatedly impact California, Oregon, and Washington. These atmospheric rivers, enhanced by the chaotic jet stream patterns, could produce flooding rainfall totals that overwhelm already saturated ground conditions. Mountain snow levels could fluctuate dramatically, creating dangerous avalanche conditions and water management challenges for the region. Recovery from a polar vortex collapse of this magnitude typically takes 4 to 6 weeks. Even after temperatures begin moderating, the atmospheric pattern often remains disrupted, leading to continued weather extremes, though gradually less severe than the initial collapse period. Long-range climate patterns suggest this polar vortex collapse could influence weather patterns well into March and potentially April. The displaced Arctic air doesn't simply disappear. It gradually moderates and retreats, but this process creates its own weather challenges as spring patterns attempt to establish themselves. Historical analysis of similar polar vortex collapse events shows they often trigger secondary collapses later in the same winter or early spring. The disruption to normal atmospheric circulation patterns can persist for months, creating ongoing weather instability that affects everything from severe weather development to drought and flood patterns. The economic impact of this event will likely exceed billions of dollars when accounting for energy costs, transportation disruptions, agricultural losses, infrastructure damage, and business interruptions. Some communities may not fully recover until well into the summer months. Emergency management agencies are already beginning preparations for what could become one of the most challenging weather disasters in recent memory. The combination of extreme cold, multiple storm systems, and infrastructure strain creates a complex emergency scenario that requires coordination across multiple levels of government and emergency services. This polar vortex collapse represents a reminder of nature's awesome power to completely disrupt human civilization with atmospheric events that occur on scales too vast for most people to comprehend. February 2025 may well be remembered as the month when winter reminded America of its ultimate authority over human planning and infrastructure. The collapse has been confirmed, the timeline is becoming clear, and the impacts will be unprecedented. February will indeed be catastrophic for millions of Americans as this rare atmospheric phenomenon unfolds across the continent with devastating precision.